Yeah.
We can start anytime.
Yeah. So we can. It's rolling.
It's been rolling.
Oh, I
You're
see.
joking. That's it. After all that.
Okay.
Bless e-government.
Welcome to the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy podcast, where we explore diverse topics and welcome guests including diplomats, experts and researchers discussing global challenges. And we deal with specialized topics in the areas of economics, policy, culture, technology and international relations and more. With us in this episode is His Excellency Omar Saif Ghobash, Advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the UAE and UAE's Ambassador to the Holy See. And I am your host, Janaardan, Director of Research and Analysis Department at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy.
Hello, namaste and salam. Welcome to another edition of AGDA Podcast. And I'm Janaardan, the Director of Research here at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. And we have a wonderful guest here with us, Ambassador Omar Ghobash, who is the advisor to the Foreign Minister of UAE and is also the UAE's ambassador to the Holy See. And he's also served as the UAE's ambassador in the past to Russia and France. Mm-hmm. And apart from many other things that he does, he's also the author of this wonderful book here, which is a reflection on various things, culture, religion, youth, etc. And as the title suggests, it's called Letters to a Young Muslim. Yes. It's no advertisement for your book, and if you do get some sales from this, royalty for Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy.
Absolutely, done.
Welcome, and lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
You're a man of words. It's not easy to match your eloquence, but let's just start with your career. Some questions on your career. You're an Emirati diplomat, all right, but the way I have, always tried to frame you has been that you are quite a global citizen. Is that a fair assessment? If yes, why? If not, why?
You're absolutely right. Going back to my father's life, he was himself a global citizen. He was born in Ras Al Khaimah in, I think it was in 1933. We don't know for certain, because that's the way it was. And he left the Emirates at the age of 12. He went to Bahrain, where he studied, and then continued on to Iraq, Kuwait, Austria, Germany, France, Russia. And he came back in his late 30s. And then, as many people will know, at least here in the Emirates, is that he lost his life at the age of 43. So the bulk of his life was actually spent outside of the Emirates. And in fact, when he came to work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he was one of the very few people who wore a suit and tie. I wish I knew why, but I don't. But that was definitely another reason why you might think of him as a global citizen. My mother is Russian. My father was studying in the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union at the time in the 1960s provided scholarships to students from the Middle East and Africa to study there. So he got his degree there in engineering. And so I've grown up speaking English as a first language, and as a child I was an Anglophile. I continue to be an Anglophile, but with reservations now with experience. And of course, I went to Oxford University, where I studied law, and obviously there's a big focus on language. And I was particularly interested in philosophy as well at the time. And there was a particular school of thought within that originated in Oxford, linguistic philosophy and part of the analytical tradition. So, global citizen, spent 10 years in Russia as ambassador there. It's really important to, in representing your country, to be able to empathize with the other side of the relationship. And once you start doing that, you do begin to lose a particular part of your personality, and your identity begins to morph. And so some people call that going native or drinking the Kool-Aid. I think of it as creating a bridge, and a bridge of understanding. So.
And how has this entire concept of global citizen moved along the generation? how do your kids feel in terms of their identity, etc.? I mean, because as we can see, a lot of the new generation begins to identify themselves as global citizens, depending on where they are.
Yeah, so my children live in Dubai, and yet they have a much clearer sense of Emirati identity than perhaps I did when I was growing up. Part of the reason is that there are many more kids who are like them, and that they are, they have a certain amount of foreign DNA. They all speak English fluently, they all speak Arabic fluently, and they mix with each other in a kind of a global environment, right? But then there's another thing, which is both of my sons, one is 23, one is 19, both of them have served or are serving in the military. And the military has this ability to really kind of form bonds between young men that wouldn't happen under normal circumstances. And so that has had also a very profound effect on the way in which they deal with the rest of the world, right? They have a very clear sense of Emirati identity, which may be very different from the one I was trying to fashion out of my English, Russian, Arabic background. They have a clearer sense of family as well, because they're very connected to my wife's extended family. So they'll bump into cousins every other day. Whereas when I was growing up, we had a very kind of very small nuclear family that never really met anybody else. And I think there is an evolving idea of Emiratiness as well. There was a very strict difference between Emirati citizens and non-citizens within the Emirates, whereas over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's a growing understanding and a growing kind of promotion of the idea of the Emirati community, where Emiratis alongside foreigners basically operate within the same kind of cultural unit, right? I mean, there are moments when you're more Emirati, and there are moments where you are part of an Emirati community. So, in that sense, also obviously, you've got global communications, you've got the internet, you've got that great moral teacher, Netflix, which seems to be bringing up a whole generation of young Arabs. So,
yeah. So from identity of an individual to identity of the UAE and the foreign ministry. You've now served in the foreign ministry for almost 3 decades. I'm sure it's a completely different place. It's a completely a different sort of approach that the UAE is adopting. What sort of continuity and change can you tell us about in the foreign ministry during your 3-decade stint there?
3 decades, yes. 3 decades.
It almost seems like you are far older than you appear. 3 decades at the foreign ministry.
I've been preserved in a corner of the foreign ministry. 3 decades. So I was in the ministry on and off for 3 decades, probably serving about 15, 16 years altogether within the ministry. And I do value the time that I spent outside of the ministry because it informed how I then came back into the ministry. But actually...
What were you doing, sorry if I can interrupt you there, during those years when you were not with the ministry?
I worked I set up a couple of companies because I was desperately interested in how an idea could be translated into an action in the real world.
You were part of the startup culture?
Yeah, but at the end of the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. And then kind of 2005, 2006, I was very involved in the promotion of education, art gallery. I established an art gallery. I was very interested in the ways in which we communicate, which are not necessarily verbal. So that was also stuff that I did. So basically, I got things done that I wanted to get off my plate. And then in 2008, I came back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One of the things that I always hear people saying about the Emirates is that it's a very young country. And so, I mean, in terms of the time since 1971, yeah, okay, so we're a young country, 53 years old, or 52 years old. And that, in a way, allows me to say that, yes, if you go back to the early 70s, the way in which we dealt with the world was rudimentary. It was on a best efforts basis, and there were some remarkable things I know are sitting in the archives that should be revealed to both the Emirati community, but also to the world about the kinds of things that were done in spite of all of the obstacles that we faced. There are other things, for example, that I see over the last, say, even 15, 20 years, in the ministry to see how we went from being having a very quietist foreign policy, one that wasn't necessarily challenging or daring or bold or out there. And then, obviously we had the Arab Spring, where really things began to be pushed to the limit. That's when I think we began as a country to realize that what happened outside would potentially have a very strong effect internally. And that's when, when you're challenged and when you're threatened, that's when your values really come out. Are you going to stand up for those values, or are you going to sort of tuck your head in and hide? And the leadership of the Emirates took bold action in a number of different spheres. But one of the most interesting areas that it took action in was internally, looking at our youth, looking at aspiration, looking at the potential, that essentially, unfulfilled potential. And making sure that everybody had the opportunity. And this is where I think our social contract has changed over the decades. Initially the social contract is essentially a patronage system of pulling people into education by paying them. I mean, in the 1960s, I believe it was actually a policy to give people money in order to send their children to school, because their parents would prefer that they took care of the camels and other animal life. So. But as time goes forward, we're now in a situation where the country has essentially, or leadership has essentially created infrastructure, whether it's legal infrastructure, financial infrastructure, educational and health, physical infrastructure, and it's presenting that to the Emirati citizen, but also to the Emirati community to use. And so I think that has led to a change. And how does that reflect within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? We've moved from being a ministry that focuses on these geopolitical relationships. All those relationships have now been established. So we used to have a very strong relationship only with the West, with the UK, with France, and with the United States. Now we have very strong relationships also with India, China, Brazil, and Russia. And that's extremely important. We've also opened up many African countries, and we have these ongoing relationships. Now, once you have those relationships in place, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Well, you get into the detail. Some of it is economic opportunity, the pursuit of markets. The other thing is, obviously with COVID, we began to understand not only our vulnerability, but also our advantage in being a hub. So the vulnerability was not being able to produce things internally and not having access to food and medicines and technologies that were vital for the health of the population. But then the fact that we had all of these relationships, which are strategic, which are political, and which are personal also, between leaders here and in other countries, and then the logistical network that the Emirates has become, allowed us to play a role in assisting other countries as well.
Sure. So obviously the UAE changed, the foreign ministry has changed. We are in a world today that different people categorize differently. From your own perspective, are we in a unipolar, bipolar, tripolar, multipolar, non-polar sort of world? What is our emphasis really? Is it geoeconomics, geopolitics, geosecurity? What is it, one over the other? How is UAE foreign policy really trying to position itself in this sort of a complex situation? Do you really believe that it is as complex as people are making it out to be, or is it far simpler from where you sit and go about doing your business on a day-to-day basis?
Right. So I'm going to be unfair and say that it's both far more complicated and far simpler. The lay of the land is more complicated. What's simpler is that we have a clearer sense of identity. We have a clearer sense of what we need to achieve. We have a clearer idea of the threats that we feel are out there. And we also have a much better idea of what we can bring to the table. Now, once you are a state that actually has certain knowledge, certain experience, once you've demonstrated that actually, out of the foundation of a country that was set up 50 years ago, you can actually build a thriving economy. And not because you planned it, but because you have negotiated and compromised and focused on the idea of building and building value for your society, then you have something to contribute to the world. And so when we look around us and we see countries that are either reforming or falling back and behind, we are able to actually contribute to their development. And we're able to provide administrative guidance. We're able to provide technological assistance. We're able to provide financial assistance. And we're able to actually monitor the way in which all of that plays out. And that's a hugely, I think, hugely important contribution that we can make. Now, people can be suspicious of countries' intentions. Our internal philosophy has always been creating wealth for everybody. Some may race ahead, some may fall behind, but overall, we believe in the multiplier effect of investment and building out economies. So you have a much fairer distribution of wealth in this country, and that has led to building an economy that can now project itself elsewhere. And so we want to take that experience and we want to be able to share that experience with countries in the region. It turns out that we're actually sharing that experience with countries further out, right? So Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. But our interest is in a region that is economically strong, is economically self-sufficient, is sustainable. And as a result of that sustainability, then it becomes politically stable, it becomes socially stable. And these are really important things for us.
Sure. Okay. My next question would be on UAE foreign policy itself. I mean, and I would like to use some alliterations just to make the question a little interesting. Basically, I think the UAE itself has moved from a camel to a cruise through COVID and then on to now the cosmos to a large extent. So which means it's very unfair for those who label us as all glass, glitz and glamour. Mm-hmm. We are very global and we have a lot of gravitas as well.
Sure.
And that's perhaps enabled us a great deal in terms of overcoming several T's that we have around the world, the turbulence, the terrorism that we see all over the place, the turmoil and that region is going through. And of course, we've made several transitions. What really have been those leadership characteristics that have enabled us to make this transition from the first C to the last C? How did we just go about doing it? There must have surely been some, calculation in terms of where they see themselves down the road and how they went about doing it, coping with all the difficult situations around us, and yet going about the progressive mechanism.
Gosh, yeah. Look, I think you're right about the kind of the path that we've taken. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about how it is that we reached where we reached, and I look back and I really think that the seeds of the success that the Emirates represents today have to go back even to the turn of the 19th century, and this needs a bit more investigation. But the idea of the Emirates of the coast uniting is an idea that is more than 100 years old. It goes back to the turn of the 19th century. That's the earliest discussion that I have heard about taking place. And that idea is kind of in the DNA of the ruling family of Abu Dhabi, certainly. And when you think that there is that understanding that goes so deep about uniting these disparate emirates, which have their own centers of power and their own kind of approach to the world, it's a commitment to unify a nation, but it's also it's a commitment to accept that there is going to be negotiation and compromise. So it took, say, 100 years to actually get the Emirates to unite. Yeah. And so much of the success of the Emirates is the fact that it isn't a monoculture. It's not a kind of a unitary state. It is a country with 7 different administrations. Some are sort of more progressive than others, but you're operating within one overall unit. You've got a unified banking system. You have unified foreign policy and defense policy, and to a large extent, you've got unified education and medical care. And so when you think that within that basic structure of security, you can then experiment, then that's when you see different things happening. So, the Emirate of Abu Dhabi will take a certain perspective on economic development. Dubai will have its constraints and also its offerings that will, lead to a very different kind of economic outcome. So I think that's part of it. The fact that leadership didn't sit around saying that it recognized that people are fundamentally flawed, right? And that, in spite of the virtues of respect and face and so on, we are all flawed. None of us is perfect. And we're dealing with a small population that needs to get moving. Opening the country to outsiders, to foreigners, and bringing them in and allowing them to prosper as well, understanding this intuitive understanding of the multiplier effect in the economy, so important that we shouldn't begrudge somebody else's prosperity or success. Now, there are other societies where the outsider will be persecuted for having succeeded, right? There was never that attitude here. And so I think that has also allowed the Emirates to be a magnet for people, the best of the best, all across the world. And over the last 3 or 4 years, you've seen how the Emirates, perhaps because of COVID, perhaps because of the changing dynamics of other societies, has become really a magnet for some of the best people in the world.
Sure. I mean, we've done extremely well in terms of our economic diversification. We've done very well in terms of our foreign policy diversification. Maybe we are doing a fair bit in terms of security diversification as well. But what about knowledge economy? Are we diversifying enough? Because I think if we want to hold on to all the things that we've achieved, we need to really be moving on much further in terms of our knowledge economy. Where are we? What are the sort of things that you would like to see moving forward in terms of developing that particular realm?
I know that we've spent time talking about the knowledge economy, but there's actually been less talk about it and more action. And if you look at the number of universities that we now have in the Emirates, the different Emirates took different approaches. So Abu Dhabi took the approach of inviting 2, 3, 4 key players and bringing them in. So you have New York University of Abu Dhabi, you have the Sorbonne, and you also have the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, and you have the Mohammed bin Zayed University of the Humanities. Now, these are places where government funding has gone in. You also have, of course, Khalifa University as well, and Emirates University. Government funding has gone in. They're becoming highly ranked universities that are doing a really great job. And we're pulling in some of the top people in their respective fields into these universities, which I think is a great thing. And we also have a program of getting Emirati students into those universities. But also, we like the idea of having a what the Brits used to call an all-boys network, but it's an all boys and girls network. The fact that you have people from the region coming to these universities and then going back to their home countries, they know the Emirates, they understand the Emirates, and you have that network effect. If you look at Dubai came with a different approach. It was, some people think it was a purely commercial approach. I think it's better to think of it as a private sector approach, that all of the facilities would be offered for academic institutions to open up. So you have this huge, you have, I think it's 40 to 50 universities now in Dubai, and you have a very large student population. And there's very little government intervention in terms of funding or anything, but it is also it's a private sector kind of outgrowth, and then again that allows the market to decide, or people to decide on the basis of what they want to study. They'll get to study that. So I think there's an increasing kind of level of expertise. And you also have a certain level of expertise that is growing around the 2 major financial centers, Abu Dhabi Global Markets and the Dubai International Financial Center. Got a lot of people working in the field of finance and programming as well around that. And there's a tremendous amount of, well, I don't know if you can call it financial knowledge, but there's knowledge that develops around finance.
Sure,
So,
of course. I mean, it's money that makes the world go around, right? So just your general impressions on the youth of today. I think we are old enough now to start judging the next
Am
generation.
I allowed to sit in judgment and criticize?
No, generally, I mean, what you see
Yeah.
around you in terms of the new crop of
Yeah.
people, coming along, both in your personal relationships and in terms of the young diplomats that you have seen in the foreign ministry.
Yeah.
What have been your general impressions?
Well, part of the reason, again, I'm not plugging my book here because it's been a few years now, but part of the reason I wrote the book was I was trying to provide the kind of structured advice to young people that I didn't necessarily have when I was their age. And I think increasingly, I just spoke to a group of your students earlier on. I think it's so important that they understand, firstly, that they can make good judgments even without full information. They don't need to live to 50 or 60 or 100 in order to be able to make decisions that are valid and important. That they should walk with the confidence and dignity of simply being. There are so many different ways in which you can be distracted today. We didn't have that when we were younger. But with those distractions, it becomes so important to figure out who you are much more quickly than it took me, for example. And it's actually really important to have a life plan because the institutions today around you will change rapidly. And they can change direction. And all of a sudden you may find that all the stuff that you've been working on has no real meaning or purpose. So, there are lots of kids who have studied international relations and will focus on that aspect. Whereas today, many of the things that we're looking at within foreign affairs are international aid, the logistics around that, figuring out the terrain of international aid and how the different organizations operate and come together. You need to understand how bureaucracies operate. You've got to understand how technology operates. But then again, there's another sphere which wasn't being used, which wasn't being focused on when I was younger, which is international law. And this whole big debate between unipolar and multipolar world boils down to this rules-based order. If there is a rules-based order, we need to know the rules. We need to know how we fit into those rules, how we work with other countries to push the rules in the direction that are appropriate for a small state like us. So I think I got a lot of optimism for these young people. But I also have, a couple of words of advice, and that's why I enjoy these opportunities to come in and say what I say.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't listen to all of what you said at
Your
the
loss.
diplomatic majlis, but I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk more about that. What, in your view, is a better template? Culture and creativity working on their own, or culture, creativity combining with commerce at the end of the day, which we see a lot in many developing societies now? Which is a better template? And what do you have to say to those who say that soft power generally has limited shelf life? Do you agree with that? Or I'm sure you disagree.
No, I thought about also soft power, and I think there's a way in which certain people look at soft power. Certain people look at the way soft power operates, and they think that actually what you can do is you can develop a plan and execute on it, and then all of a sudden you'll have soft power. Whereas I think soft power is actually a reflection of who you are and what you've been over 20, 30, 40 years. And so if you look at Emirates Airlines is a form of soft power, which started off as a commercial operation to bring people to the city of Dubai. And it was almost accidental, the way it started. And there was no reason why Emirates Airlines should have been an airline that was always cutting edge in terms of service and entertainment. But that's the way that leadership wanted it to be. And that becomes soft power, because now, for example, I avoid any other airline other than Emirates Airlines, because it feels like I'm in a qualitatively different place. So that's something that happened, right? I think if you look at all of the glitz and bling around Dubai, again, nobody planned that. And it isn't necessarily a true reflection of Dubai. And yet, that impression, whether fed or unfed, has led to a certain amount of soft power as well. And I don't think that you can manufacture that in advance. You couldn't have predicted it either. in an office. So I think soft power is something that happens as a result of the way in which you operate in the world.
Sure. Let's just switch gears to the other disruptor in the world today, which is technology, basically. How do we cope with technology in our personal lives? That's been difficult to many people. It's come easy to the younger generation, I think. The older generation have had it a little tough in terms of how they've adjusted to technology. But how do we cope with the intersection of technology and international relations? And how does technology impact diplomacy per se? Because if you looked at the COVID period, diplomacy functioned just through technology, largely.
Yes.
There was very little interpersonal relationships at that point in time. So from a personal relationship at the diplomatic level and in terms of technology impacting international relations itself, in terms of the politics and the economics, what sort of thing are we moving towards?
I think, when I think of technology and international relations, I really look at the subject of artificial intelligence. And I'm using ChatGPT, and I have found that it is a remarkable extension of the mind. It helps speed up my learning by a factor, I don't know, in some cases a factor of 10. It accelerates the rate at which I can produce the kinds of things that I want to produce by a factor of 30 in certain cases. I mean, I actually went through the calculations in terms of time and effort. I think it's incredibly important, especially for small countries like the UAE with not a huge population, limited bandwidth, many different tasks. If we think about how we handle these issues, there were many issues that we were never participating in, that we didn't participate in internationally, because you simply can't be a member of every single organization and be present at every single organization and absorb all of the information you need to have, and then create a policy out of that. Today, I think actually AI is allowing small states to play a bigger role at the table. And I think within our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we need to start thinking about where else do we need to be, what other things do we need to bring to the table in order to exploit this advantage. I think also, I think we were saying earlier before the recording, that AI is something that you need to interact with as opposed to take instruction from, right? It's an extension of your mind, but it's also you have to push back, and it's what you get out of AI is a reflection of the way in which you question the world, right? You question the world, you already have an understanding of the complexity. You may not have all the facts, but you can pick up quickly from the answers that you get where you might want to delve more, where you might want to shrink the focus and move to other areas.
We've moved along 50 years since the Federation was formed, 52 to be precise. We're already looking at 2071, which I think is a bit further away. Where do you see the world in 25 years, and where will the UAE be in 25 years? Just some impressions out of your head.
Out of my head. I can tell you where I see it coming in the next few years, and that is a power for good, a power of stability, one that focuses on the well-being not only of its own citizens and the Emirati community, but of that of the region as well. I hope we'll be able to share as much of our knowledge and our experience with others in the region, and that we can actually play a role in perhaps mediating some of the conflicts, unnecessary conflicts, and demonstrate that ideology can only take you so far, and that a pragmatic, forgiving, compromising approach might be more beneficial. To show at least our region that every human life is valuable. Every human life is one that should be lived in dignity, and that has to be the starting point of any discussion.
Sure. So let's just lower the temperature a bit and ask you, if you were not wearing your diplomat's hat, what are you generally doing? Are you reading books? What is the book that you that has left an impression on you, or give us something in terms of who your role model is, somebody from outside the UAE. Do you listen to music? What sort of music do you listen to?
The music, I cannot reveal what music I listen to. You would...
Don't tell me it's Bollywood.
No, I wish. No, I haven't even graduated from the Cranberries, Avril Lavigne, unfortunately. I have 5-year-old daughters who listen to the same music that I listen to. So it's quite, embarrassing and endearing at the same time. Strangely, I have an increasing interest in economics and the way the economy is operating. And I spent a bit of time in exploring the private sector. In my position as advisor, I get a bit more freedom to kind of poke around. I'm very interested in the role of the Emirati citizen in the economy and where technical control lies, right? And so I see that there are, obviously there's 90% of the population is non-Emirati. And if you look at the banking sector or the financial sector, most of the technical operators of that system are non-Emirati. And I'd like to see how that translates into opportunities for growth and then also obstacles. So I'm spending a lot of time in that sector. I'm also looking at this may surprise you, but I'm very interested in the way in which debt operates in the market. Yeah. And that goes, all the way back to Plato, Hegel, and Marx. The master-slave relationship, the creditor-debtor relationship, and the way in which debt can empower people, but at the same time discipline and limit them. So that's where I spend a lot of my time.
So you could be the UAE's next ambassador for debt diplomacy, given the way we see things going around the world, right? Anyway. We could just go on, but one last question.
Yes.
If you weren't a diplomat, what would you be?
I would be all the things that I have been already.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually, when I was a child, I always wanted to live 1,000 lives. And I think I'm certainly, I've certainly managed to live a number of lives. So, I'd never thought I'd write a book, but I wrote a book. I philosophized in public, which was great for me. I never thought that I'd be, speaking on TV, and I did. And the different kinds of mountain climbing adventures, there's so many different things that I wanted to do that I actually managed to do. So I'm very grateful. Yeah.
Great. I mean, a picture tells 1,000 words, they say, and you have given us 1,000 stories about everything, about yourself and about the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We could, as I said, we could just go on, but that's all we have time
very
for.
Kind
You've been very generous with your time. We appreciate it. And as you move on through the chapters of your book of life, we wish you the very best.
Thank you so
very
much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really great.
Thank you for listening. This episode is presented by the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. The Academy offers accredited educational and training programs dedicated to preparing future diplomats and leaders in the government and private sectors. The Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy combines a unique institutional approach with diplomacy, academic programs, and research. You can learn more by visiting www.agda.ac.ae.